Hey guys, it's Josh. You know what? Before we even get into today's episode, I have a question for you guys. If your dating history had a Spotify Wrapped, what would be the top genre? Because I don't know about you, but for me, I seem to be on repeat with all of my relationships, dating the same type of person, maybe with a new face. So I may not have a type, but I definitely have a pattern because every relationship seems to end the same way. I think that maybe it's not my ex having the problem. It actually might be me. So this week, we're going to have an episode that talks about breakups, attachments, healing, the whole shebang, so that maybe, just maybe by 2027, we can break a couple of these toxic cycles. My name's Josh, and welcome to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. And some days we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. And I guess this week is a special guest, Ben Oofana. Ben, thank you so much for agreeing to hang out inside the Bachelor Pad this week. How are you?
Good. Thanks for bringing me on, Josh. Appreciate your authenticity there.
But listen, real growth happens when you're honest. So if I'm
True.
going to be honest with me, I have to be honest with the audience as well. Tell us a little bit about your backstory from all the years, the decades studying ancient indigenous medicine to modern takes on emotional recovery, dealing with heartbreak. You have one doozy of a childhood that we spoke about a little bit before we started recording. So I know we'll get into that. There's just so much that you've gone through and studied to bring you to this culmination of today. Can you just tell us a little bit about when you first noticed that maybe I do need to find some type of regulation, that I need to start taking an invested interest in me?
Well, growing up in Southeast Texas and in a highly dysfunctional home, subjected to a lot of physical and emotional abuse. But at the same time, there was also this fascination with Native Americans, and that started in early childhood, which only grew when I learned about the traditional Native doctors at the age of 14. I decided, if given the opportunity, this is what I'll do with my life. I took off on my own after my junior year of high school at 17 and landed in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians and spent many nights sitting up in the teepees and the peyote meetings with Native elders. And that's how I initially met my mentor, Horace Delkai, one of their last surviving traditional doctors, who, during the apprenticeship, he passed on portions of his own healing gifts to me. And part of the training entails the vision quest, which typically involves fasting alone in the mountains 4 days and nights without food and water. And he had me assisting him as he would work with people at times. But I was still very hesitant to start on my own. And after a few years of just going through horrendous ordeals. I mean, you do things like drop me off the middle of the Hopi Indian reservation with $30, tell me to hitchhike to Las Vegas, Nevada, and make it the best I could. And so there's a lot of survival training to force me to rely on my instincts. Getting close to graduation, it's like, wow, I actually have to support myself. There's no more college financial aid, which wasn't much in those days. But as I started working with people, it was like pouring hydrogen peroxide into a deeply infected wound. Before, I was very dissociated, spacey. People would comment on it even. And yet, here I found myself forming attachments to women who were either disinterested or unavailable, and some were quite abusive. And as I look back, there were other women that had a lot going for them, that showed interest, but I fixated on the ones that were not so healthy. And I went into psychotherapy for a few years. I mean, I was at a complete loss initially, just not knowing what to do, because to find yourself overwhelmed with such excruciating pain. So psychotherapy provided a lot of valuable understanding, insight into why I was in such a bad shape and the patterns I was enacting in my relationships. And it's a very important component of my healing process, but the trauma itself wasn't healing, and I continued to attract the same type of individual. You're talking about that Spotify playlist and how it ended the same way. But instinctively, I somehow knew to dive into the depths of those all-consuming, painful emotions And sometimes I would do so for hours on end. Initially, I'd be curled up on my side, but I kept breathing into them. At a certain point, I could feel the pain breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. And underneath that pain, there was this presence that would emerge. I could feel this sense of connectedness to a higher power, this emanation starting to flow from within. And that was healing, stabilizing as that happened. The other thing that happened is I found that those attachments would start dissolving, and I would often find myself feeling very different about the woman that I'd formed that attachment to before. But there was still the repetition that was happening. The practice alone wasn't enough to completely free me from it. So, determined to do whatever it took to heal, I began exploring any therapeutic intervention that held promise, doing lots of deep tissue body work, acupuncture, working with a homeopathic physician. That surfaced a lot of emotion embedded deep within my body that I was previously numbed out to colonics. I did lots of stuff, but say the most powerful were the sessions I did with gifted healers, like some of the ones I worked with from like Brazil and the Philippines. And because there were so few people working on this level, is at 31, I felt that pull to come back to the Wichita Mountains to go on the vision quest again. And parts of the vision quest are in many ways like a near-death experience. It's like feeling this presence descend into my body, and it's like portions of my life flashing rapidly before my eyes and reliving traumatic events, even going back to early childhood, some of which I'd completely forgotten, and more recent adversity or relational drama I've been going through. And all that would be cycling through me, and the emotions are flooding back, and what I was thinking at the time, all the other vivid sensory impressions. And I could feel that presence helping me to literally digest, like the food you eat. I was digesting what I'd gone through, and it's like new foundation was taking shape inside of me. So it's been a very long, arduous process.
That usually is how self-development happens. Is we wish it's overnight, but it's usually over decades, and
Over
then it
decades.
never really ends. There was a lot there that I know we're going to touch on and unpack, but one of the things you said that was so vivid to me is, no, guys, this is a safe space. We're not judging, or if you are judging, judge in the form of likes by leaving a like if you think I'm saying something crazy. We all have this pattern that we go through whenever we're in a breakup, because some of us do love fast and love hard, or just love hard. And then when we leave those relationships, we don't really know what to do next because they've been such a big part of us. So for me, I have a playlist that I add to every time I go through a breakup. It started with like 5 songs. I think it's now 5 hours, 4 hours and 38 minutes. I had it pulled up next to me. But I listen to that every time I go through a breakup. You know, I might need a good cry at the end of the night or to fall asleep, and that'll just be going in the background. But that's one of the things that like helped me process. But that's just a temporary Band-Aid. It's not really a measure to process those big feelings in the long run. You started leaning into the healing, the breathing of those indigenous and those native like doctors. That's something that I've heard a lot more about. I don't know if you've ever heard of Wim Hof, but that, yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of his founding principles as well, is your body is so strong. You just have to learn how to tap in and to channel it. And you've done that and then some as a student and now a practitioner. So I think that's amazing.
What I find is that there's a lot of these parts of us that are really deeply wounded, and we hold a lot of this emotion. Sometimes it's difficult to access them. And what I found is the more that I can still myself and I slow the breathing down, I'm breathing as deeply as I can, all the way down to my abdomen, expanding my abdomen and then rib cage, pausing and exhaling slowly and pausing again. But that subtlety, I find, helps to access a lot of this emotions that are trapped in the body that we tend to run past, or miss. So
Is a big thing that I notice is we're on autopilot when it comes to our body sometimes. And what I mean by that is we don't take the time to, we'll feel the feeling, but we won't take the time to understand it. So we log it, but we don't process it and we just keep going. And then sometime down the road, it just comes back and it smacks us again because we didn't process how to not just expel it, but to handle it. I don't even know if that's the right word that I want to use right now, but to really deal with it.
I'm really happy you brought that up because there are reasons for that. Yes, a lot of times we will feel the feelings, but often that alone is not enough to fully cycle through them. And that happens for a number of reasons. We tend to feel at superficial level. What I found is like I will, as I said, sit with feelings for extended periods of time, hours even, and close my eyes, drop down into them, fully immerse my awareness in the depths of these feelings and bodily sensations, and continue breathing and following them. And the more you can fully open up to what you're feeling, drop into it, keep breathing, keep following it, it will go through a lot of layers. I remember one time after a breakup, and I was driving from Santa Fe back to Albuquerque. At that time, I felt just a lot of deadness in the middle of my chest. And yet, night after night, I kept bringing my awareness there. And as I kept breathing into the feelings and sensations, like at first it was faint vapors of feeling, the loneliness, the longing. It felt like my whole chest cavity was aching. I kept on, and the more I did, is the more of that kept moving through. It was like all this old residual emotion that was still hanging out, embedded in my heart and lungs, and it was just coming up and out, and I was feeling it. And then as I moved through it, more of the sense of euphoria. There are other components as well that in many ways, we are like the hard drive of a computer or external hard drive, that we store the impressions of these lived experiences. They live in our bodies. When we go through various traumas or adversity, it causes some biochemical changes within the brain itself. And sometimes it can have a ongoing effect. It doesn't necessarily just revert back. It leaves us more in an imbalanced state. And then it affects the neurostructure of the brain itself, how the brain develops. And, there's also this habitual patterns of thought, emotion, and experiences. So we're digging the rut deeper. And so the practice I described is very helpful, but at the same time, there's also where the intervention comes in. And there are a lot of different interventions. The body work, for instance, will help to break loose a lot of that emotion that's trapped in the body. When I go on the vision quest, the 4 days and nights without food and water, that's been the most powerful, getting in and really dismantling these. Because a lot of these lived experiences and all the emotions and thought processes, it's like this configuration that's so deeply embedded inside of us. And so as I'm going through this, the vision quest, I feel it's being dismantled. Among the Native Americans and other indigenous peoples, the traditional doctors served as conduits, meaning that they allowed this other force or presence to work through them to facilitate healing in the body and mind that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So having received that transmission from a native doctor and gone through so many vision quests, I work in that capacity. So when I work with people individually, it's facilitating a process very similar to what I go through during the vision quest, just bringing all that lived experience and emotion up. The person's digesting it like the food they eat. It's being transformed, and this new foundation is taking shape. And that's when people's lived experience dramatically changes so that they're no longer recycling the same playlist.
Which is good. I was like, and let's just take a step closer, because sometimes we get so caught up in just the practice and the theory that we don't talk about the actual situation, which helps some people kind of grasp or relate to things. One of the biggest things is people are no strangers to breakups. They're not something new that's just been happening. They've been happening since forever. But why do you think that some people can just walk away from a breakup and not think about it, and some people are still stuck on that same person a month, 2 months, 3 months later?
I think we're all wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain patterns or predispositions. If you look at attachment theory, for instance, and you have individuals with the more secure attachment style, and those tend to be individuals who grew up with parents who are more loving and supportive, and it's like a healthier family dynamic. And it's more often the case when a relationship doesn't work out, they may grieve or feel a bit sad, but there's more of a sense of trust that things will ultimately work out for the good and they'll find their special someone. You have those with an avoidant attachment style. There's often more of a disconnect. They're less apt to feel that acute pain of loss and more inclined to put up walls to distance themselves. That closeness, getting too close feels very uncomfortable. And there's one man that have worked with for quite some time. I was seeing that with him. And I remember at one point just encouraging him, give her a chance. And I was just feeling that pushback. It's like, no, let it go for now. But I saw how he transformed, and he's been in a relationship for some years now. It's amazing to see him come around. But those of us with a more insecure attachment style, which is where I started, and those of us who experienced a lot of abuse, neglect, harsh criticism, maybe abandoned by a parent, and even some of those, we're still very vulnerable as we enter our teens and we're developing romantic interest. And if those early romantic attachments, if we happen upon somebody who is just really hurtful and abusive, cruel, that can leave some devastating scars.
Some
within
serious
us.
baggage. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And those scars become deeply entrenched. And there's this repetition compulsion. There's part of our psyche that's seeking resolution, that's attempting to heal. But the fact that we lack the understanding or resources, what sadly happens for so many people is that it turns into this destructive, repetitive cycle where we keep replaying, reenacting.
Yeah, and it goes to show that the power of closure, and we all get closure in so many different ways, and there's so many ways to obtain it. I don't think it's necessarily something that's given. It's something that we have to take from the other person in order from ourselves or to foster within us. We can't just let them hold that. So do you think closure is one of those illusions that we think that we're in control of to regulate ourselves, or is that actually something that could really benefit our nervous system?
Closure can be tough, because a lot of us feel like if we can just have one more conversation, if we can just work out our
Yeah.
differences, and a lot of times those differences are not reconcilable, and or for whatever reason that person that we were with for a time decides they want to move on, or someone completely ghosts us, which makes it even more difficult because we're left with that pain and we don't have the opportunity to even speak with them. And so it lingers. We feel that stuckness inside of us. And it's taken me a long time on a number of occasions, especially when there were ghostings and the person just dropped out, disappeared, no explanation. But I would keep bringing that person, and this is a very important practice, let's say, the person that I was seeing. Like there was a ex-girlfriend back in Sri Lanka, and there was a lot of interference, meddling from her family, and just,
It's the worst.
yeah, I was devastated at the time. In hindsight, I'm thankful that relationship ended, because I realize now that intellectually we were at very different levels, and
Right.
it wouldn't be so fun, especially you get older and people are not quite as cute or handsome and or beautiful,
That
and
is
you're
the
looking
way
at
for it
this
to become.
person and it's like you can't relate to them, and what's coming out of their mouth is just,
Right.
especially if you pop out kids with them. I have a friend, and she's in a similar boat, maybe different. She actually got married before she could just walk away, just take off and ditch the guy and be free. But after marriage and two kids, you're never free from that person. So there are all these different factors that play in. And I dived in and did just so much intense practice, cycling this grief through me. and going through the vision quest. At 40, I started training with this master from China. And when at first, I'd gone through a few too many mugging attempts. And when he starts showing me Qigong, it's like, why are you showing me meditation practices? I need to learn to rip someone's head off. And he's very calmly persistent. And I didn't take it all that seriously at first, but then I ran into this guy and he had been doing all this pranayama Kundalini practice. I saw him when I went back to India and I was like, what have you been doing? And I could see how it just ignited him, developed considerably, had this presence about him. It's like, and I knew that Qigong and pranayama were related. It's like, oh, I better be taking this seriously. So I get back to New York. Then I go to the opposite extreme. Instead of hardly doing it, then I was worked up to like 2-3 hours a day.
You're just doing it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just building more and more that internal power. So when that latter ghosting happened, I cycled through it in just a couple of months. Even though I felt very strongly for that woman, I cycled through it. And it was interesting too, because she was like these others reflecting my own emotional wounding. She was reflecting what was left. And in year by year, as I continue doing all this intensive practice, I keep going down through the layers. And so not that I'm not a masochist. I don't want to seek out someone who's going to emotionally torture me or anything.
We're all gluttons for pain when it comes to love. You don't have to say anything, Ben. We get it. No, I'm joking.
Actually, it's for me, the thing is to just keep evolving. Like if someone does trigger me, I haven't found anyone to trigger me to that extent. I just let go that much more easily.
And that's what we have to do. You can't really hold on to too much. You can only carry it for so long. If you're so stuck on the past of the last heartbreak and when's the next one coming that you stop living, you're pretty much going to manifest the next heartbreak if that's the only place you live emotionally or mentally, I feel like.
Well, that's another important thing too, is that there's that expectancy. And when a lot of that wounding, that relational trauma lives within our body, we're more prone to reenactments. We find ourselves drawn to that same kind of individual or someone very similar. And we have that vulnerability and there's fragility about us. And I see a lot of people also close off, wall themselves off and give up on relationships. It's sad when that happens. What I've found is I've continued to take the steps to further in my healing, that there's more and more of a lightness and aliveness, just a comfort. And sometimes I could still feel vulnerable in some moments, in some instances, but compared to what it used to be. And I continue to stretch, because, like when we went into COVID and I wasn't working my ass off like I was, because the world as we knew it came to a standstill and I couldn't conduct my weekly classes in weekly New York, bi-weekly Boston. And I wasn't running all over both metropolitan areas, making house calls and I had all this time and I didn't want to just waste it binging on documentaries. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to sit for at least 3 hours a day. And by extending my meditation practice, what I found is that it enabled me to drop through more and more successive layers of the trauma, the wounding. And not that everything was so painful, but there were just like a lot of this dysfunction. We're in these weird contorted positions in the way we engage, the way we form attachments, the way we interact. And yet I found as I kept descending through those layers, I could feel where I was really off balance on the way I would relate or engage with certain people. And the emotions and thought processes that operated outside of my conscious awareness, well, that's coming within conscious awareness. And I'd be digesting that. Again, everything combines because I'm doing the practice, I'm doing the body work whenever I can. If I found some gifted healers I could work with, like I had years ago, we work with them. It's very few people I find working on this level. So I have relied on the Vision Quest mainly.
I do want to bring up the point that today we have all these life coaches, podcasts, self-help books. you name it, you can see it somewhere. What is something that you've noticed or that you think a lot of those ancient traditions and those deep healings remember that we seem to have forgotten?
As I mentioned at the beginning, earlier on at least, that developed, and part of it was having worked through so many layers of wounding trauma that I was carrying in my body has made me highly empathic. And I see and feel, I look down into people's bodies. I wouldn't discourage anyone from going to psychotherapy. I think it's very important. Many people need to be in psychotherapy because, say, for instance, if you do deep tissue body work and you're flooded with all this emotion, you may not understand what's coming up. You need some guidance in terms of understanding, like, where a lot of this comes from and how to deal with it. But anyway, I see people who have gone through years, even decades of therapy, have binged on podcasts and YouTube self-help videos and all the books. And they're whining to me about, I've done so much work on myself. Why am I still dealing with it? And I actually just posted an article on recently about this. But a lot of it I find only goes so deep. And so many people in our culture, it doesn't go that far beyond intellectualization, or they may feel to some extent they're not fully digesting what they're carrying. So yes, we need the psychotherapy. And I too, I learned some really valuable things from podcasts and from YouTube videos. But if that's all I did, I would still be really screwed up badly. And I suffered tremendously. I had these profoundly deep attachment wounds or scars. And I was locked in this cycle of reenactment. And when you combine the practice, like I described earlier, bring that individual to your awareness, or the relational dynamic itself that you're caught in with them, bring it fully into your awareness. See it, feel it. You're right there in the midst of it. And that person's right before you, holding them in your mind. And what do you feel in response to it? Sadness, grief, fear, insecurity, the fear of abandonment, inadequacy, defective, and where are these feelings in your body? Are they in your throat, abdomen, deeply embedded in your chest, or some other part? Get as deeply inside of these feelings as you can. Breathe softly and deeply, all the way down to your abdomen, expanding your abdomen, then your rib cage. Pause, exhale all the way out very slowly, softly. Pause again, and keep repeating this. Continue the cycle. Like I said, I would be doing so for hours on end. And if you hit the wall and you're just a wreck, you can't really do much anyway. Might as well just really pour yourself into the healing process. Dive in. Make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions. Keep yourself open. Be willing to explore. Test things out and be thorough. If you're suffering from whatever condition and you have access to the most effective supplements or medicinal herbs, what do you think is going to happen if you take it just once or twice or something?
Right.
Not much.
It's not instantaneous like we've talked about today.
Yeah, give it a chance to work. Definitely. But like I said, using these interventions, the body work, the homeopathy, the acupuncture, the sessions of gifted healers, and going through all these vision quests, we need these really powerful interventions. And there are aspects of the healing, like a lot of this wounding, this scarring that people carry, where they're locked in the cycle of reenactment. There are aspects of this healing that I don't see heal other than, say, the indigenous healing practices, such as, going through the vision quest, or working with, say, myself or some of these indigenous healers like you'd find among the Native Americans in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. There's very few people here in North America still practicing at this level. There were many extraordinarily powerful doctors among these various Native American tribes. And it grieves me. My mentor, Horace, he was the last of the really powerful doctors among the Kiowa people. There are a few others, but they didn't have anywhere near that power, that what they call medicine, that Horace possessed. You go down into South America, but you need to be careful too. You don't just go wandering off
That's not a
into
place,
the
you
Amazon.
just want to take a side quest on.
Yeah, you'll find yourself with a bunch of arrows poking through your body or something. You won't be walking out of there. So you need to be very careful. And also, those people don't have the immunity to a lot of the infectious diseases that those of us of here in North America and Europe and other parts of the world have immunity to. They're highly susceptible, and it could be fatal for them. So we don't want to expose a lot of those uncontacted or rarely contacted peoples to these. That's what wiped out the vast majority of Native Americans: smallpox, cholera, measles. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with a little self-isolation. And a lot of those cultures, indigenous tribes, have done that, or not even intentionally, but they have done that to us. They just haven't been around us. But one thing that I wanted to also like circle back to, that we've kind of talked a lot about the past in our body, but not about present or the future. And how that relates as it relates to us is we always say, I'll know when I'm ready to love again, when I'm ready to get back out there. You talked about these practices to help us regulate and how to process, but have you learned any type of practice or just any really fundamental lesson that lets us know, hey, I have healed a little bit, or I've at least healed this wound. Maybe I can reopen myself to the world, to a partner.
And I reflect back to when a lot of this was surfacing in my mid-20s, and I was like, could hardly get out of bed at times, and just so easily triggered and flooded with such overwhelming, at times excruciating emotion, and being so awkward. And there was this baseline of pain that I was living with. And so there was a very deep hole to dig myself out of. At first, I was flailing blindly. I didn't know what to do. But I would test things out, the therapy and the practice and interventions. And I kept going with what I found that was working. But what I found is that the painful periods, painful non-functioning periods, were decreasing in duration, and they were happening less frequently. They were becoming more spaced out. And then I was noticing that interactions, experiences that used to trigger me, not triggering me so much. Maybe some, but wasn't quite so big of a deal. And individuals that I would have been very much attracted to, very much wanting to be in a relationship with. And there was this kind of, just get away from me. And sometimes too, there was, it went both ways. Before that vulnerability, and I think sometimes there are certain individuals, it could be men or women, that they sense vulnerability like, sharks smell blood.
Right.
And they pick up on it, and they're on a search and destroy mission.
It's like, and they're ready to get back into that manipulative, toxic game. Yeah. So you do have to be weary of those people.
And they take delight in it, especially those with really sociopathic, cluster B personality disorder types. But as time went on, there was more and more revulsion, aversion to those kinds of individuals, where you have that limerence or that fixation, that you form that attachment. It was like, I'm seeing through them. They're becoming more and more transparent, and again, more disgust. And they would pick up on it. And it could be very uncomfortable, very intimidating for them. And they would deflect off of me, which saved me a lot of additional hell and heartache. And it wasn't all just smooth trajectory. There's the last time it was like 10 and a half years ago that where I got really, really triggered like that. But as I said, cycled through that much quicker. But what I find is that, as I said, the painful periods become less frequent. You move through them. Sometimes, like even that one 10 and a half years ago, I mean, it was intense emotion. It was like, God, did I make any progress at all? But as I said, I cycled through it a lot quicker and bounced back. And so there's more of a resilience. But the other thing too is that there's more of a sense of lightness. There's more and more freedom, and where you could just be open and engaging, and you just don't have that much attached to it. You could take it or leave it if there's reciprocity, and if it's a reciprocal love. But if it's not, it's a lot easier to let go, and you may feel some sadness or some longing, but it's not devastating. You're not strung out like an addict needing their fix.
No, for sure. And this is a funny question that kind of piggybacks off that is, if you had to say, what is a toxic trait or a red flag that a lot of us romanticize inside these relationships?
Aloofness, unavailability are some of the biggest. There's a lot of us fall into this trap of wanting what we can't have. I think it's like a reenactment of that abandonment wound. And yeah, I haven't felt or sensed that within myself for a very long time. It's like I can.
I mean, that's kind of the name of the game, is breaking the pattern. We hope that, after doing the work for so long, that we are semi-aware of these patterns and we are just avoiding them by routine now. We don't actively have to avoid certain people or certain stimuli because we can see it brewing and know to stay on the opposite side.
And you don't even have to avoid it so much. You're just not drawn into it. You are naturally, as you evolve, attracted
Right, yeah.
to healthier companions, romantic or platonic friends or otherwise. And yeah, you just naturally gravitate to what nourishes you, and you just feel more of an aversion to what used to suck you in.
This journey is one day at a time, and before you know it, you can't even see the starting line because you've just made so much progress. Has there ever been a time where you've ignored your own advice? You know what you need to know, you know what you should do. Your body's screaming at you, this may not be the right move for us, but you still do it anyway?
There's often a great deal of disconnect that we spend much of our lives avoiding, suppressing, distracting ourselves, avoiding the emotions, suppressing the emotions, self-medicating, all that. And also the fact that we have, as individuals, a limited processing capacity. Computers have a processing capacity. We as individuals also have a limited processing capacity. And that's why, again, we need both practice and intervention. We need to bring them together. So what I found is my own experience going back over time, the more disconnected I was. And especially when there's these traumas live within our body and there's all this highly charged emotion. And so this is operating from deep within the body, within these parts of the brain, not so much the prefrontal cortex, but these other regions. And so we're just drawn in like this compulsion, and we're blind to a lot of our actions that we're not fully registering what we're doing, but we're pulled into it. But one of the things I found is that the more that I continue with the practices and interventions, that it's as these deeper wounded parts heal, and as you're digesting more and more the backlog of residual emotion. I mean, think of the stress you go through in one day of your life. You have a shitty day at work or something, and you carry a lot of that stress. And we come home and we're staring into the idiot tube, and we're binge eating, or we're scrolling, or doing a combination of all three. And it doesn't give us the chance to really process. And so multiply that by all the days, weeks, and months and years. And so in our bodies, we carry so much residual emotion. It just backs up. And there's so much numbing, so much disconnect. And most of us are not going to meet someone with a dissociative disorder. We're not experiencing depersonalization or derealization, but we are to varying degrees disconnected. And some of us much more so than others. And so what I find is the further we progress in our healing, there's more of this integration, mind, our bodies, our emotions, all that trauma, all that emotional residue that sits within the body, that's undigested, that's in that congealed state. It's parts of us that are unconscious, and it's highly charged emotion, these unmet needs, all that. And we're living with that. And so with so much disconnect, of course, it makes it very difficult to tune into our intuition. We miss a lot of these internal subtle signals. And that's why it's so important to day by day, the intensive daily practice and intervention.
You can't tell how far your growth or development happens in isolation. It's once you step out and you reintegrate into connecting with other people that you really can see how far you've come and where you might still need to do a little extra work.
Definitely. Yeah, there's the thing when we're just alone, and sometimes we need to back off for a while just to process or digest. But a lot of times people stay locked in the loop, and they're still ruminating about the person who ghosted or that they were seeing or whatever. But when you, as you're getting out and you're engaging, and even if you're not quite ready to fully
Yeah.
jump into another relationship,
Mhm.
just engaging, and you find like, wow, I still can have feelings, and this person's stirring stuff in me and triggering me sometimes, and well, good, it's putting me in touch with some feelings. I can work with that, and it helps to free us up from that unproductive loop that many of us keep spinning around in indefinitely.
Right. And being triggered isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is a really big connotation with that word, but you could also trigger positive emotions inside of a person for everybody listening as well. That sensation of butterflies is usually triggered when you are
Yeah.
connecting with somebody and you're excited about their presence or the interactions that you're having. So that's one thing I also just wanted to put out there. I didn't want people to think that your body only recognizes negative triggers. I was like, it recognizes all of them, all of those points of stimuli, so to speak.
And you could also take the unpleasant feeling triggers and you could see them as an opportunity.
No, I mean, that's what I call them anyways, or just opportunities to practice what you've been preaching, opportunities to practice the work you've done, opportunities to connect, to grow. Like they're all opportunities, points in your life where you could be great. You just have to be present.
Yeah. And that act of showing up present and engaging, and that stimulates growth. I think the most important thing I'll be reiterating here is that we face all kinds of challenges. All of us do. And it varies from one individual to the next. We're wounded in different ways. We have different kind of wiring, and yet there's also a lot of commonality. But whatever challenge, wounding, whatever you're struggling with, to the best of your ability, embrace it. With the mindset of like, this is my karma. This is my lesson that I'm here to learn. Just pour yourself into it and work with the practices like I described. Again, when you find yourself triggered, when something's evoking strong emotion, acknowledge what's happening, what you feel, where the feelings are within your body, breathing all the way down to your abdomen, very slowly, very deeply, pausing, exhaling fully, completely, pausing again. Do this practice. Do it initially sitting. Keep your eyes open when you're in conversation, but stay connected to what you're feeling and keep breathing from the depths of it. And I find it deepens the interaction. Make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions. Be open, explore, see, feel what's most effective. Really give it the opportunity to work. If you do it once or twice, you may not really know. And to the best of your ability, show up.
Mm,
Pay attention, participate, just really get into life. We spend so much time scrolling and working on our devices, and some of it we have to do. I have to do a whole lot more than I want to. I
right.
miss the days when I could just show up, present for groups of people. And sometimes when you're a conduit like I am, sometimes people they're feeling that power working on them, and they're having all kinds of stuff is surfacing and they're digesting it right then and there in the moment. But it's a different world. Now I'm having to reach out to people virtually, like on podcasts, like what I'm doing right now. But get out into the world, get up from your work, take a break. I'll work for hours, but then I'll get up when I'm in New York City and I go for these long ass walks through Manhattan and walking for hours, and better if you could walk in nature and, get out to events, find out what's interesting about you. And if you're in a supermarket or you're on public transportation or wherever you happen to be, sense into people, feel their presence, and put yourself in the proximity of those individuals who, if you feel drawn to someone, make conversation and work at it. There are books and there are videos that go into depth, that talk about ways to engage with people and test things out. And sometimes if things don't work, someone reacts or freaks out. Sometimes that will happen, but the more you do it, the more fluid you become socially at engaging with people.
For everybody who's been tuning in today, make sure you go follow up. Reach out to Ben if you have any other questions about not just processing the breakup, but just about all these different modalities to help with this introspective, intrinsic work to regulate so that when we are at these critical moments that we know how not to get pulled in, how to get caught back up into maybe that impulsive, toxic pattern that we've been doing most of the year for many years. I will be sure to put all of his links down below, or if you're listening on any of the streaming apps, they're still somewhere around in the show notes.
My main website is just my name, benoofana.com. You could find the spelling in the show notes or on the title or wherever. And then there is a contact form. Reach out to me through the contact form, especially because I may be overseas sometimes. And so that's better than calling. There's also teachmetomeditate.com because I developed this extensive series of intensive meditation practices that awaken, engage the innate healing intelligence residing within your own body and mind. Heal My Heartache is a deep dive into healmyheartache.com. That's attachment wounds and abandonment and healing for those who have cycled through this series of destructive relationships and building the foundation that enables healthy reciprocal love. And breakup first aid is for those in the midst of the breakup, the crash itself. And if you really need someone to talk to, there's heartachehotline.com. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, long-form videos. So those are my contacts.
Perfect. Thank you so much again, Ben, for being here today, for sharing, for reaching out and connecting with the audience. I will be sure to see all you amazing bachelors, bachelorettes, and partner people next week for an all-new episode of the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad. See you guys.